Welcome to Shut Up and Sit. I'm Yedda Stansel, a consciousness coach and consultant. I'm on a mission to bring mindfulness to the modern world. Each week, we will offer ancient healing practices, real-world examples, and the latest research in neurobiology and behavior change into fun conversation that invites you to wake up your highest self. Now, let's go shut up and sit. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you today. I feel like I say that every episode, but the truth is I am excited to be back here with you every day, that I get a chance to talk to you all and share not only our stories, but a little bit of information that can help all of us to make the world a little bit more of a loving and kind place. And I am really excited today because I'm here with one of my favorite people in the world, and he really is. Philip Davidson is here with us today. We're going to be talking about the 4 components of being human. In our last episode, I was talking to you about the link is what you think, and just talking a little bit about my story of just waking up, and that I had to learn what I was thinking about and how mindfulness helped me to understand the link really was about what I was thinking. And if you recall from that episode, if you listened to it, we talked about mindfulness isn't really about stopping the thinking. It's first and foremost becoming aware of the process of thinking. And so in this exciting journey for my wake up, and you guys have heard from the first episode, my big old belly flop that my ego did from the high dive and kind of splatted to the bottom of the pool. In that process of kind of picking myself up and putting my ego in a bucket, as you remember, I said I kind of walked around and was just asking questions and wanting to know how to learn more about this process. Like, who was I? How does all this stuff work? I had known a lot about health and wellness. I had been involved in that community for a long time. But what I didn't know was I spent a lot of time working on the outer parts of being healthy and well, and never really did the deeper dive inside. And so one of the people I met, Philip, was you. And so when I met you and your beautiful bride, Kay, that was a real answer to prayer, because I was walking around looking for a community to get connected into learning more about mindfulness. So I want to welcome you to the show today, and you have so much infinite wisdom. I think it's all the gray hair that you have. And you've given me permission to grow mine in, but I want to welcome you to the show and just thank you for literally the years of wisdom. You guys, I spent a lot of time with Philip and Kay, and he's going to tell you his story and the work he does here in the community. But really, whether you guys knew it or not, but the very first time we met, when I heard about your Sunday meetings and got invited to come and listen to mindfulness and the teachings that you all offered, it was literally a lifesaver for me. So welcome to the show. And Philip, why don't you just tell us a little bit about how did somebody so wise and so normal get involved in the mindfulness movement?
Well, thank you for inviting me to be part of this podcast. I love being a mindfulness teacher, and I love being able to share what I have learned, both through study and, even more importantly, through my own experience and my own practice. I spent a lot of years in graduate school studying finance many years ago, and then spent about 30 years in the financial services industry. And it was a great career. I got to do a lot of really cool things. I was with both the Federal Reserve System and with a commercial bank here in Richmond. And at the commercial bank, they let me expand from just pure finance stuff into strategy and into organizational development. And then in my mid-50s, for a number of reasons, I ended up with the opportunity to change careers. And it was about that time that Kay, whom you referred to earlier, my wife, was doing a lot of touring as a docent at the Virginia Museum. And they had acquired at that time a substantial collection of Tibetan art. And so she had to be trained in how to tour this art. And I remember after the second or third training, she came home and she said the following, which I guess is more relevant if you know that she's a clinical psychologist by background. She said, a religion that includes and incorporates psychology. So and we started going together, and she taught me about it, and so that's where my interest in mindfulness began, with the art at the museum. When, if you have any inclination to go to the Virginia Museum, be sure to see their Tibetan art. It's gorgeous. So over a period of years, I've kind of fooled around with this a little bit, dipped my toe in the water, stepped back, and Kay was more diligent about it than I was. She's much more the scholarly type. And eventually I said to myself, well, it's time to get going here or to just forget about it. So in the fall of 2009, I started taking it all a great deal more seriously and started going up to Washington to the Insight Meditation community and working with Tara Brach and many of the programs she offered. And out of that came an experience that lasted a year working with her husband in a program called A Year of Living Mindfully. And as part of that program, we each got a chance to meet with Jonathan on several occasions, one-on-one. And by October, he said to me, have you ever thought about being a mindfulness teacher? Well, that was about the fourth time in my life that somebody had asked a fork-in-the-road question. And one of those was when one of my roommates in college said, would you like a blind date with my girlfriend's roommate, who turned out to be Kay?
Well, thank goodness you said yes to that one.
I did.
She's incredible.
Yes. I said yes every time somebody asked me these things. And so Kay and I ended up participating in a 2-year meditation teacher training program back in 2011 through 13. And at the same time, we began teaching together. And most of the time, we have taught together. And it has been a very important part of our relationship, and it has allowed our relationship to grow and unfold and deepen in ways that I never expected that would happen. Well, and in a few moments, I'll give us a specific example about that.
One thing I love about you sharing that, not only did it deepen your relationship, when I first met you and Kay, a lot of the preconceived ideas that we might have around mindfulness, dressed in burlap, wearing a rope, for a belt, bald head, or some type of Eastern philosophy of some type of, norm. When I met the two of you, you were normal. There was a man and a woman dressed in normal clothes and having her psychology background and expertise, your masculine kind of corporate way of showing up and teaching, and balancing, seeing the two of you be able to give a whole experience in the classes that you taught was the first thing that I thought, this feels really good. It felt inclusive. And the second thing that I got was, not only could she bring the heart and you brought the head, because I think sometimes you guys also now flip that role, she would bring in different aspects. But what I loved the most, and your stuff is in my book, you would bring worksheets to the courses. You guys know, no lie, seriously. Here I am, I'm like in full-blown mental, breakdown mode, showing up to these classes on Sunday, hearing the two of them teach, and I literally still, I have a folder, I'm not kidding, Philip, it's this thick, thick, and it would be a 1-page worksheet. And you have this amazing ability, and I do think it's your corporate background, to take and synthesize really esoteric, abstract amounts of information and drill it down into the 3 parts of this or the 4 components of that, and really not only teach it to people, but every time I left there, I felt like I was heard, I felt like I belonged, and I felt like I had really valuable information that I could work on until we met next time. And that was enough. I just want to repeat the words
that Yedda just said, because they're so important about our experience of being human. You felt heard.
Oh, yeah.
You felt as if you belonged, and you got useful information. Just let's take a couple moments and sit with those 3 ideas and reflect on how important they are in our lives, how much more compelling our experiences are when we are able to be in that place where we're heard, where we belong, and we would get some useful information. This really matters.
Yeah.
So thank you for saying
it's
that.
It's life-changing, and I'm not sure, and it's again why I want to bring this information out in the podcast and why I want to do the work I'm doing with the courses, the book, whatever it is, it's all the same information, but it's put into ways that I just say normal people who can still live a normal life do. I think I always thought I had to let go of some aspect of who I was to find who I was. And through your teachings and through what I learned with you and Kay, I realized I can still be who I am while I'm figuring out who I am. And that's really what we're here to talk about today, because I'll never forget when I heard you teach about the 4 components of being human. I mean, you guys, it was like the skies just parted, this light just shone down, and I was like, oh my gosh, what do you mean there's 4 components to being human? It was life-changing for me to know that who I was unique, but that this uniqueness of me was the same for everyone on the planet. Yeah. Greatest paradox of all time. So I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I think it is important for us to think about how we teach, how we show up, and how we invite other people into that experience. You guys definitely did it without judgment. You did it without a lot of, I don't believe we can ever say you do anything without ego. You did it with a very healthy, right-sized ego. And you were constantly in a place of curiosity and open-mindedness to learn as we all learned with you. And that's a piece in this work that I think is absolutely paramount, to invite people in to knowing how and what mindfulness is and how to actually use it. Because one of the things I've shared with you over the years is what happens when we just stay topical on the work that I found was our ego just replaces one identity for another. And then especially in mindfulness, if I let go of something over here unhealthy, I can as a human have a tendency to put something else in its place. And then I think I did the work, but all I did was I just changed whatever we have, masks, labels, roles. And I now all of a sudden am attached to not being attached, which is a whole nother ball of wax. And I've met some people, I'm sure, and people could say the same thing about me, that I thought the last thing I get from you is mindfulness, but we're so tied to their dogma and their way of doing it and their rituals, I didn't get to do the work. So you and Kay really brought a different experience for me that I think is something that the world is looking for. So thank you very much, because it did change my life. And so I get sidetracked. But did you ever think you'd be sitting literally at the mindfulness bar in Shockoe Bottom in Richmond, Virginia with me all those years ago when you met me? And I would say something as crazy as we're just day drinking some silence down at the mindfulness bar, hanging out, learning how to sit with our suffering.
No way. When I walked here from where I parked the car, I walked around the corner where the original Sam Miller's was. And I remember going there back in the mid-'70s. And what a big deal that was to have, Richmond had only had liquor by the drink since 1968. Wow. So having a really cool restaurant like that. So here we are with another way that Shockoe Slip, Shockoe Bottom have played an at the edge role with you bringing the mindfulness here and putting it at the bar. It's great.
It's cool. And I love it. I love being here. And I don't want to, I'm sure people are just waiting with bated breath. You said he was going to talk about the 4 components of being human. So I do want you to enlighten us, and I'll let you pick it back up where you had stopped. But let's go further into kind of that journey for you, and then let you just drop the mic on this whole process about being human. And we're not going to literally drop the mic, Philip. I don't know if you know what that means, but you have enough white hair that could go either way. So I'm just
it's
checking.
All good. When Kay and I, let me put it this way, about 18 months into our teaching, we began to have a sense of the impact we were having. And we put it into words, and then held that as an intention, and have continued to hold it. And what we offer is tools, techniques, skills, understandings for living a human life.
I love that.
Not more complicated than that. It's not about getting off into some abstract concept about not self. Who cares about that in a philosophical way? What we want to know is your life full of discontent and suffering? And are you understanding where that arises from? And are you willing to access and experiment with some tools that can help alleviate some of that suffering? We're not going to make everything go away. We're not going to turn your life into a field of endless bliss. That's not what a human life is about. Living a human life is hard. The opportunity is to not make it harder, which we're inclined to do. So let me talk about what you've been referring to. My word is actually a little different from yours, but it doesn't matter. A number of years ago, Kay introduced me to the work of a British academic psychologist named Paul Gilbert. And it's out of his work that this framework arose. And here's the storyline for this framework. There are 4 conditions of being human that are beyond our control. And what happens next is up to us. And in that big sentence, that big compound sentence, the "and" is the mindfulness experience. When we engage with mindfulness, then we are able to appreciate how these 4 conditions are affecting us, how that's beyond our control, and still be in a place where we can choose, where we can find the space to choose. So let's talk about the 4 conditions. And I'll invite you to maybe take a moment and get a piece of paper and something to write with, or get your tablet out.
Or if you have the book, it's in the first chapter where we talked about link is what we think. But just a disclaimer, if you're driving, just keep listening.
Just keep listening, yes. Because I'm going to ask you about how each of these 4 conditions shows up in you, which is what really matters. It's not the concept big out here. It's how they affect us. So the first condition is how our brains and nervous systems have evolved over 5 million years. Now, what are the chances that no matter how good you get, how good I get at mindfulness, we're going to undo the work of 5 million years of evolution? Not likely. Now, there are a lot of complex...
I think I need to back up and maybe reevaluate. I thought it was possible. Now I know why I'm suffering so much.
Exactly. There are a lot of complex dimensions to our brains, but mindfulness teacher and neuropsychologist Rick Hanson captured this 5 million years of evolution best when he said, our brains are Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. Which means that we have this negativity bias in our brains. It's why the news media is so full of negativity, because it's how it gets our attention. We need that to survive. The first order of business is survival. Mm-hmm. So this is how our brains are wired. So take a moment and think about how it is that this negativity bias in your brain shows up for you. Are you the kind of person who always finds things that are wrong? What's wrong? What's not working? Are you highly reactive when you feel the least little bit threatened? I have tended to be a pretty reactive person over the years. And what mindfulness has done is allowed me to be less reactive in the moment, to be more aware that my reactivity is occurring, and then to take steps to deal with it. So take a few moments, make a couple notes, and think about how reactivity shows up in you, especially with this negativity bias.
I don't know about you, Philip, but I'm getting some images of what I would say, how I would imagine my reactivity used to look like would be me doing backflips out the window with a couple of grenades and machine guns on the way out while I was texting you a few of my thoughts in the process.
Exactly. We all have our own image of that. So the second condition is our genetic composition. Now, Yedda once confided in me that she went out of her way to choose her parents and get the genetic makeup that she's got, but she's the only person I know who's ever actually claimed that.
Hey, holding that belief in the beginning, I thought, well, what if we did choose all of this? And what if I am in control of every single aspect? And then after that comment, I realized how ridiculous that sounded. And I thought, why am I thinking that? Because if I believe that, it makes me feel better about what happened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So again,
I do love my parents, though. My mom's already been on the show, by the way, so we got to say that because she's going to hear this and be like, what on earth is she talking about? I do love my parents.
All right. So, for instance, we typically think of genetic composition as determining how tall we are or what color eyes we have, but it also has a huge influence on our emotional makeup, our psychological makeup, our mental capabilities. So, one of the things that researchers have discovered is that there are markers on our genetic code for how anxious we are. Mm-hmm. And some people just show up with genes that cause them to be a lot more anxious. So lots of times when you see somebody who's pretty anxious, it's not so much about the conditions in their lives, it's in their genetic code. Or when alternatively we meet somebody who's just cool as a cucumber all the time, well, their genetic code's a little different.
Yeah. And I think that's important. And I know suffering from anxiety, my family, my son, the genetic aspect of that. I remember when you said that, the freedom that I felt around that, because I felt like something was wrong with me because I wasn't somebody that could keep it all cool and calm, and knowing that maybe I just live at a different baseline is a really freeing place to understand. And then to start to tell other people in my life that I'm naturally prone to anxiety, crowds or whatever it is, begin to actually impact me differently than they impact you. That's a component of being human that I think we forget, and we assume everyone's just going to handle things the way we do, or someone else does.
It's so different for each of us how these specific conditions show up. And I'm going to emphasize this point again and then again and again later. Beyond our control. The way the brain evolved, this genetic composition is beyond our control. We cannot do anything about what it is as it is. So here's the third condition. And this is one that we all relate to a little more directly. We are shaped by our experiences, and we are especially shaped by the experiences we had, say, between the ages of about 2 and 18, plus or minus a little bit. Because in that time frame in our lives, we are awake and aware of what's going on, but we can't do anything about it. The experiences we're having are beyond our control. They're determined by our caregivers, by the institution, the educational institutions we're part of. All of those things are shaping us. So here's a big so what for me, and then I'll ask you to think about it for yourself. When I was growing up, I worked hard to be a really good son and person. But of course, I made lots of mistakes. And my mother, who was inclined to get a little overly enthusiastic when she was chewing me out, would show up sometimes, accuse me of something that either I didn't think I'd done at all, or I thought was this big, and she's reacting like this. And once she started in, there was no room for me to speak. Mm. So I'm extremely sensitive to not being heard. Well, just think about the difference between living in that experience, having that be a driver and shaper of my own behavior, versus being aware of it. Now I'm aware of when I'm not being heard. And as the frustration in me rises, then I can go, oh, that's what's happening, and take a deep breath. So what are some of the experiences that happened in your life when you were young that you couldn't do anything about? You coped with the best way you could at the time, which probably turns out not to be a skillful coping approach as an adult. So just think about those for a couple minutes. Make a couple notes about them. This is one of the juiciest of the 4 conditions. And remember, all of this was beyond your control.
Yeah, Philip, while folks are thinking about that for themselves and making some notes, I asked a client the other day, and I don't take credit for this, I heard this somewhere, but the question was, what inner need does your worst habit fulfill?
Exactly.
And I thought, wow. And it's in those moments, again, could you imagine if we were raised with this education and this knowledge? It's just so unbelievable. It was so liberating for me, and a story that I'll briefly share. When my son was little, he was 2 years old. He was a great kid, and he started having these meltdowns. And so, friends would come. He'd have a little friend come over for a play date, and the little boy would pick up his baseball bat and he would pretend like it was a sword or something. And my son would have full blown. We're talking like the play date had to end meltdown. So I took my son with me to see a therapist, and I thought, either I'm a horrible mother or we're not, like something's happening here. What is going on? And I remember the therapist asking me a little bit about my background. Told her a little bit. Apparently she was asking about my human story, and told her about my mother and my biological father, who, was a biker, and my mom was 17, pregnant, and just kind of how life started for me. And she stopped me and she said, well, there's your problem. And I said, what? And she goes, he has biker blood running through his veins. And I remember leaving that session after I paid her and cussing under my breath the whole way home, thinking she was a horrible therapist. And the truth is, now when I did this question and I thought about what was my experience as a child layered on top of the genetics and my brain, and looking back at my little baby, he was having his own experience of whatever was happening. Even if we have the intention, you guys, to be the best of parents or whatever, we're still unconsciously doing things and playing out things that our children and people that are experiencing us at that young age are impressioned by. And knowing that, and I realize I'm triggering your ability to get a word in to speak, so I'm aware that sometimes our dynamic can get you going. But I just really thought that was so empowering to know what happened to me. It was a wounding. I developed a habit in my own way, just like my son was trying to develop a habit to get his needs met. But we're at such a young age, and our brain at that point only has 2 of there's actually, more than 4, but I talk about the 4 major brain waves in the book, but only has 2 at that point. And it doesn't have conscious thought to be able to skillfully say, I'm hurting, I need to speak, and I'd like for you to sit down and breathe and let me have an edge and a word in, Mom. We don't have that capacity.
No,
and then we carry it into our adult life.
And so we end up developing unskillful habits that can be harmful to us and to others. So let me go to the 4th condition, and then we'll process all this a little bit more. The 4th condition are social and cultural norms. So I grew up in a suburban community in a Great Lakes state in the 50s and 60s. And there was this enormous emphasis in this community on education. 95% plus of my high school class and everyone went to college.
Wow.
It was push, push, push around that. That was the ambiance. That's the water that I was swimming in when I was growing up. The second water that I was swimming in was the world of business. My father was a business person, and we talked about it all the time. There's this story that my parents tell of when I was 4 or 5 years old. My father bought a business associate home late in the day, and then they all were going out to dinner. And so he went upstairs to change clothes, and he sat me down in the living room with this business associate, and I crossed my legs and turned to him and said, "So Al, how's business?" That's the world I grew up in. And that's had a big impact on me. So these are the 4 conditions beyond our control, how our brains evolved, our genetic composition, the experiences we had, especially when we were young, and our social and cultural norms. The so what of this goes to one of the core characteristics of mindfulness, which is the ability, the capacity, learning this capacity to accept the reality of how things are in this moment. And everybody says, oh, I don't like the way things are. Things aren't good. Does that mean I can't change them? That I'm condoning these difficult things? No, it doesn't mean that at all. What it means is that unless we accept the reality of what's already happened, this moment that's here right now, we recognize it's already happened. Unless we accept that, we're caught up in denial that it's happening. We resist it. Or, my favorite, wishing things to be other than they are. When we're caught up in those one or more of those three things, then we are unlikely to be able to form a skillful next step, a way of responding and dealing with the situation. It's a little bit like software that's been corrupted. Mm-hmm. It still works, but it gives you flaky answers.
Yeah.
And our responses, the way we deal with it. So we begin with this acceptance, and being able to say, beyond my control, is a way of being able to accept the reality of what is, to give us the space to then say, what are my alternatives here? How can I do this more skillfully? How can I bring more kindness into what I'm doing with regard to treating myself and to treating others? Yeah.
And would you say that, Philip, when you first learned these four components of being human, would you say that, and I'm just kind of thinking about from my own experience, and everyone's doing this differently. It's such a wake up call. But, my question for you is, would you say that this is probably one of the most important, if not the most important thing in beginning a mindfulness journey to go into with a little bit more inquiry to learn as you build a mindfulness practice?
Well, I would choose a little bit different response on a little different track from that. Part of what mindfulness is about is the invitation to experiment. And so what I might think is important, just because I found this four-component framework to be of so much value to me, doesn't mean that it's going to appeal to everybody that's in the group. What I've merely invite people to do, and Kay has helped me with this immensely, because if you're a person who feels not heard, you make this commitment internally to being right, to being accurate in what you're saying, to speaking very clearly. Well, just because I speak in a way that I think is clear, or is clear in a business community, doesn't mean it's clear for everybody.
That's a great point.
So that's why we invite the opportunity to experiment. But learning this art of acceptance can be of enormous value. And when we experiment with that, most people discover, oh, there's a real relief. There's a that happens. And there's one other thing that can happen here that's really powerful. This is a big, big deal. It was for me, and it has been for others. And you can experiment and find out for yourself. The clearer I became about how each of these four conditions shows up in my life on a daily basis, the clearer I became about how the way it showed up was beyond my control. I had that moment. It's a Leonard Cohen moment. In everything there is a crack, and that is where the light gets in. And the light that came in for me was forgiveness. It's beyond my control. I can forgive myself for it. If somebody took a misstep out there at the moment, walking by, and fell through the window, our reaction would be to be pretty annoyed with that person. What's the matter with you? If we then discovered that the person had a heart attack and fell through the window, and the falling through the window was totally beyond their control, we'd feel very differently about the person and the experience. Just a simple little example there. And then there's a second so what of all of this. I forgive myself multiple times a day. It's just the way life is. And I keep on doing it and stay committed to it. So the longer I stayed with that, then I had a second little light that came in. And that was, Kay and I have been together for more than 50 years.
Really?
I know her really well. Yeah, this is our 55th year.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I know her really well. I've known her since she was 21 years old. I knew her father well. I knew her mother well. I know her family. I know the circumstances she grew up in. I know how all of the 4 conditions show up in her. And so I forgive her. So often, when we are in an interpersonal relationship with somebody we care about, we tend to take what they say far more personally than it's intended.
Yeah.
That's part of this business you talked about earlier about ego. We take it personally. Well, about 11 out of every 4 things that she says are not meant personally to me.
Yeah, and that projection and when we're not awake and aware and cultivating a mindfulness practice, I use words like autopilot, and we're just projecting our own pain and suffering off onto our partners, our family, our friends. And to me, learning the 4 components of being human, we're not just liberating to finally get permission to be who I was and to know I have biker blood running in my veins. I have, all these energies and these characteristics and styles. And even, I said this in another episode, when I go to the doctor's office and I do all those little physical forms, they always ask me like, what's your family health history? And it is really nothing other than, addiction because we have anxiety and mental health issues, and it's just all self-medication. And so learning that and going, that's what I am prone to do. That is where I come from. Yes. And really being able to accept that and understand that, instead of, I think of the years I spent trying to run from it, to really becoming a chameleon, if you will, to try to be everything to meet everyone else's needs to get my needs met. And what a lower, we have a whole nother episode, and don't worry, you guys, Philip's coming back. He's amazing. Seriously, I'm watching Griffin. We're all just like sitting here, like there's this sage who's just you have so much wisdom. And it reminds me how much when I do hear you speak, you do know, and how much I still need to learn in my own journey. And we're all learning, and I know you believe that. But back to what you were saying with Kay, and she really is, she's amazing, you guys. She's one of these people that has the eternal smile that just says welcome on her face. I don't even know what people like that look like, live like, who they are. Kay, it was a very rare gift for me to experience that from a woman. But so these components and how you guys teach it and the freedom that I found with it really began to open my eyes to say, I can actually learn to love myself. Yes. And that forgiveness piece and the cultivation, because I would hear words in the mindfulness community, and I think I did what some people, I say a lot, but probably a lot of people did. I started going into yoga, studios and yoga communities, and there was all this talk about, being kind and being compassionate. And yet the places I was going, I didn't see that alignment. Yeah. We were teaching it, but dropping deeper in to cultivate. And this is in my book, and it's in my story, but the very first time I went, when my marriage ended and I was kind of carrying that bucket around, I went to a therapist, and this story, but I walked in and I just said, so I need to know what love is. I need you to is there a book you can recommend? If you could just draw out a schematic to teach me what love is. We could be out of here in 48 minutes because I know the session is 50 minutes long. And he literally said, I can't help you. And so I was that naive that I thought you just go get someone to teach you what it is. And he said, but I know someone that can help you. And for my listeners, if you haven't heard the story, go back to episode 1. But the long and short of it was, the only way I could figure out what love was to shut up and sit down and get silent and go inside of me. Yes. And cultivate knowing who I was. And nobody could tell it to me. Nobody could diagram it. my own mother couldn't show it to me until I really sat with, and in the silence and stillness knew, oh, that's what it is. And the reason why the therapist couldn't tell me was because you find it in silence, wisdom,
right.
self-love, compassion. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's something I love. You guys are going to hear us talk about all kinds of cool stuff on every episode. This to me is earlier in the book because it felt like it was, actually, as you were talking, I was thinking, oh man, maybe my book is wrong. But I do have
Nothing like a little Velcro coming into play.
Yeah, a little Velcro for the negativity coming in. But you know what I thought I caught myself being aware of, and what I do believe, what you said, it's an experiment. Experiment with whatever you find, whenever you find it, however you find it. The problem with personal development is we're so trained to think there's a system.
Right.
And as you were answering that question, I thought, I want to be aware to kind of let go of wanting to teach even this whole idea of shutting up and sitting as a system or a process. It's a personal experience. And you said something really wise one day. I'll never forget. You said, this is solo work that can't be done alone. And that's really why all of this is coming about and why we want to share content with you and bring you amazing people like Philip and give you really sound bites of information each time you listen to the show, because you can't do this work alone. You have to be alone in the inquiry, but you don't have to be alone without a community of people to guide you and to teach you. And another great wise man that I studied with for a long time, Ken Blanchard, early on in my business career, I'll never forget once he said to me, he said, I will mentor you, I will teach you. But he said, you have a moral obligation to teach others what I teach you. And so for me, that came true in your teachings, Philip, in saying, I can't not share this. I have a moral obligation that as I'm sharing with my clients, people walking by on the street, the listeners on this show, whoever is out there, this information has value. Now, what you do with it, like you said, is up to you. And so I just, I want to make sure everybody hears that we're all finding our own way, and it might feel like you're alone, but you really can't do this work without a sense of community. And so before we go, I do want to talk about the amazing sense of community that you and Kay have built with the Innerwork Center, and wonder if you could just share with our listeners a little bit about what that is and how much you guys do to serve our community through it.
The Innerwork Center has been around for about 25, 26 years. It previously was known as Chrysalis, and it changed its name a few years ago to come up with a word that was a little easier for people to understand and appreciate. And the name points to what you're talking about, this capacity to be in silence and observe what's going on with our thoughts, observe what's going on with our emotions. And one of the first things we observe when we do that is impermanence. Mm. We begin to see that everything is a result of causes and conditions, and it comes and goes. So that's one of the major teachings in the different programs the Innerwork Center offers. It offers multiple programs in mindfulness training, in psychology and spirituality, in creative expression, and in movement. You can find it at innerworkcenter.org online. Sign up for the programs. These days, many of them are virtual. I want to talk for a moment about this point you were making about being in community and doing it together. Since last April, I've been leading a program that happens every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning for 45 minutes, starting at 9:15. And I pick a particular mindfulness topic, make a few comments about it. We have a meditation practice around it. And then I ask a question, pose a question to the group. And then I put everybody in breakout groups of 2 or 3. And give them 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes to talk about the question. And then we come back together as a whole. And somebody this morning said, I just want to comment on how valuable this overall experience has been for me, and particularly these small groups. He said, what I discover in these small groups is that regardless of how different we might appear in age or gender or socioeconomic status or ethnicity or even in our politics, when we get to the heart of the question, what we're talking about is ways in which we are all the same. And in mindfulness, that's called common humanity.
And boy, do we need more of that right now in the world.
We really do. And when we begin to sense our common humanity, which the 4 conditions, understanding that, allows us to do, makes a big difference.
And you know, I attend that group. What I love, and if we can even have some positive aspects that have come from the COVID experiences, we've been forced to catch up with our technology. When I first started meeting with you and Kay on the Sunday groups, it was a monthly group on Sunday mornings, and we would meet at the Inner Work Center, formerly Chrysalis. Then you guys moved, got the Inner Work Center as a name, and that was wonderful. But that was a once a month experience. And so because we went virtual and because of this whole experience of the lockdown, we ended up, you offered on Zoom, which was a whole technological, you had to get a crash course in how to do this. I think most of us did. And you went online and immediately built a community for the rest of us. We didn't even have that. We didn't even know we needed it. And when I miss a Monday, Wednesday, or a Friday morning, it's because I have something absolutely I cannot, get off my calendar, or it's work related. But I now try to schedule as best I can to keep that block of time open, because that sense of community and that lifeline to be in a place where you're getting teaching, you're getting your wisdom, but you're getting the wisdom and this common humanity piece. And why I believe the whole world needs to learn to shut up and sit down and find silence is, if we can experience common humanity in those small groups, we can experience them in bigger groups when we go out into the world. When we can experience common humanity in bigger groups, what happens is the world's social norms begin to shift. All this unconscious bias, political unrest, racial division, all these things we've been experiencing, the pandemic, it's waking us up in a way that I don't think we ever could have imagined. But thank goodness for the Inner Work Center. And for those of you listening, what I want to say, because it's virtual, you can join from anywhere. So our listeners don't have to be in Richmond, Virginia. And who knew that would be an option for this work? So I'm just excited. And guys, you can look it up and check out the website, and you'll get all the great information on that. And I'm just honored to just have time with you. Every time I sit with you, Philip, I could just sit here and be quiet. I don't know if I really could, but being in your presence and the wisdom that you have it's such a great teacher for me. And I hope that I've done you some service by carrying your work forward into some of the work that I've been creating to help my clients and the people that I'm serving. So, whether you guys have gotten the book, or you're taking the course, or doing coaching, or whatever you're doing with the Shut Up and Sit manual and materials, Philip's work is in there, and right off of some of his worksheets. And like we said today, was the 4 components of being human, which is in the Link Is What You Think chapter. And I'll be back with you guys on the next episode to talk about the 5 basic human needs, which, Philip, you're all very well aware of what those are as well. So we'll be back to talk about those. And again, as we said, each episode, we're giving you sound bites of information, valuable information that you can carry out into the world. And as you think about these 4 components of being human, and you sit with those today, allow it to bring you to a place of self-love, to compassion, to forgiveness, to acceptance of who you are. But also maybe just see if you could get curious enough if it could bring you to a place to actually accept who others are. It might change how the rest of your day goes. So Philip, any parting words before we leave our listeners? Any words of wisdom, oh great sage, wizard, all-knowing?
Thank you for allowing me to be part of this experience. And I appreciate greatly, as does Kay, the efforts that you've made to pull all this material together, to offer it to people in all these different ways, to combine mindfulness with the other coaching capacities that you have, and so that you're right there interacting with people in the thick of their lives And so good for you for doing that. And there's a multiplier effect that works with all of this. And I'm part of the multiplier effect, and now you're part of it as well.
And all the listeners, you guys have heard it now, so you can't unhear it wherever it takes you. I hope it brings you to a wonderful place of loving kindness and compassion, which will help our world to be more loving and more kind. So I know until next time, the next episode, make sure you catch us on those 5 basic human needs. But I hope you have a wonderful day. Again, thank you, Philip. Thank you, Griffin. Thank you to all of our listeners, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
May you know goodness. May you know peace. May you know contentment. May you be